There's a bridge in medieval London that shouldn't exist, not because it's impossible to build, but because once built, people decided to live on it, to open shops on it, to construct houses, tall, narrow, timber-framed houses rising 7 stories high on a stone roadway suspended above a river. Imagine walking across a bridge and finding yourself in a street. Buildings crowd both sides, their upper floors jutting out overhead, blocking sunlight. Shopfronts display goods, bread, cloth, tools, fish. Residents lean from windows. Children play in the narrow passage between homes. And below your feet, through gaps in the floorboards, you can hear the Thames River roaring through stone arches, compressed into rapids by the bridge's own foundations. This is Old London Bridge, built between 1176 and 1209. 33 years of construction. 200 buildings eventually standing on its back. A stone crossing that became a neighbourhood, a marketplace, a chapel, a defensive fortress and a pumping station, all at once. But before it became a city, it was an engineering challenge that medieval builders had no guarantee they could solve. The Thames is not a gentle river, it's tidal, rising and falling 4.5 meters twice daily, reversing current direction, turning calm water into surging flow within hours. Previous wooden bridges burned or collapsed. Ferries were dangerous and slow. London, growing rapidly toward 100,000 people, was strangled by its own river. The city needed a permanent stone crossing. King Henry II approved the project in 1176. A priest named Peter de Colechurch was appointed bridge master, part engineer, part architect, entirely responsible for making the impossible happen. He had no blueprints from successful projects. No one had built a major stone bridge across a tidal river in England before. He had observation, experience from smaller structures, and the knowledge that failure would be visible, permanent, and deadly. The plan was ambitious, 19 stone arches spanning 280 meters. But arches need foundations. Foundations need stable ground. And stable ground doesn't exist in the middle of a tidal river where mud, silt, and current conspire against anything humans try to anchor. So they would create artificial islands. Wooden cofferdams driven into the riverbed, pumped dry, filled with stone piers rising above high tide. 19 islands, 19 piers, 19 arches connecting them. A stone skeleton spanning the Thames, strong enough to hold not just its own weight, but the weight of buildings, people, traffic, and centuries. The construction would take 33 years. Workers would drown. Storms would destroy progress. Tides would flood work sites twice daily. And even after completion, the bridge would create its own danger. The stone piers would narrow the river so severely that water would rush through the arches like rapids, making passage underneath deadly. Shooting the bridge would become a phrase Londoners used to describe gambling with death, but it would stand. For over 600 years, Old London Bridge would carry London across its river, a stone spine holding a city together even as that city grew on the bridge's own back. This is how they built it. This is how medieval engineers turned a river into a foundation and a bridge into a neighbourhood. Welcome back to another journey into stone and time. This is the Sleepy Structures, where we explore how our ancestors built wonders that stood for centuries after their creators turned to dust. Tonight we travel to medieval London, to the River Thames, where engineers spent 33 years constructing a bridge that would become a city unto itself. Old London Bridge, 19 stone arches, 200 buildings rising on its back, a tidal river compressed into rapids beneath. Built without modern tools, without steel, without the mathematics we rely on today. Just stone, timber, human determination, and a priest engineer willing to stake his life on calculations he couldn't prove until the final arch was complete. So, settle in, breathe slowly, let the sound of the Thames wrap around you as we build something impossible, together. Let's begin. London is dying of thirst while surrounded by water. The year is 1170, and the city sprawls along the Thames's northern bank, a jumble of timber houses, stone churches, market squares, and narrow streets packed with over 100,000 people. It's the largest city in England, the centre of trade and power, a place where wool merchants negotiate with Flemish traders, where whose ships unload wine from France and spices from the east, where the future of a kingdom takes shape in counting houses and guild halls. But the river divides as much as it connects. South of the Thames lies Southwark, suburbs, farms, warehouses, the roads leading to Kent and the continent beyond. Between the two sides of London runs the river, and crossing it is a problem that costs the city time, money, and lives daily. The only option is ferry, wooden boats that carry passengers, cargo, and occasionally horses across water that shifts with tide and weather. During storms, the ferries don't run. During fog, they collide. During winter, ice makes the crossing lethal. Trade suffers most. A wool merchant in the city wants to move bales to Southwark warehouses for shipping. He loads carts, hauls them to the riverbank, waits for ferry space, sometimes hours, pays crossing fees, unloads onto boats, reloads on the far side, continues to the warehouse. What should take an hour takes half a day. Multiply this by thousands of transactions, and the Thames becomes an economic tourniquet slowly strangling London's growth. People have tried solving this before. Records mention a wooden bridge in 1136, a timber structure spanning the Thames, wide enough for carts, supported by wooden pilings driven into the riverbed. It stood for perhaps a decade before fire consumed it. London burned frequently in the 12th century. Timber buildings packed tightly, cooking fires, torches, accidents spreading into conflagrations. The bridge burned with the rest, and no one rebuilt it. Timber bridges don't last in a city that burns. Before that, other wooden bridges likely existed and failed. The Thames is not kind to wood. Tides rise and fall 4.5 meters twice daily. Current reverses with the tide, flowing upstream during flood tide, downstream during ebb. Wooden pilings rot. Ice in winter crushes them. Ships collide with supports. Storms rip structures apart. Wood is temporary. London needs permanence. King Henry VI understands this. By 1176, he's ruled England for over 20 years, survived rebellions, built an empire stretching from Scotland to the Pyrenees. He understands infrastructure, roads, castles, ports. He understands that London's growth is limited by its crossing. So when proposals arrive for a stone bridge across the Thames, he listens. The proposal comes from an unlikely source, Peter de Colechurch, a priest, not a master mason, not a military engineer. A priest who has spent years studying structures, observing how arches distribute weight, learning from the few stone bridges that exist elsewhere in England, small spans over calm rivers, nothing approaching the scale or difficulty of the Thames. But Peter has something others lack. He believes it's possible. And in 1176, King Henry appoints him bridge master, giving him authority, funding, and the responsibility for succeeding or failing visibly in front of the entire kingdom. Peter begins with questions that have no clear answers. Where exactly should the bridge cross? The Thames is 280 metres wide at most points through London. Too far upstream, and the river is wider, requiring more arches, more cost. Too far downstream, and the tidal surge is stronger, making construction more dangerous. He walks both banks, measuring, observing, consulting with fishermen who know the river's moods. He settles on the crossing between Southwark and the city, roughly where the old wooden bridge stood. The riverbed here is relatively shallow. Bedrock or firm gravel lies under the mud, reachable without impossible excavation. The banks are stable, stone wharfs already built, proving that foundations can be anchored. It's not the easiest location, but it's practical. Next question. How many arches? Too few, and each span becomes dangerously wide. Medieval engineering can't build stone arches much beyond 12 meters without risking collapse. Too many, and the construction cost becomes impossible. The number of foundations overwhelming. Peter calculates 19 arches, each varying in width depending on the riverbed's specific conditions. Not elegant mathematics, just practical adjustment to the reality of working in a river that refuses to cooperate. But the real question haunts every decision. How do you build foundations in the middle of a tidal river? Stone piers need solid ground. They need to rise from bedrock or compacted material strong enough to support not just the bridge's weight, but the weight of everything that will eventually cross it. Carts, horses, crowds, storms pressing against the structure. But the Thames riverbed is mud. Thick, soft, unstable. Digging through it means fighting water that seeps in as fast as you remove it. Build on top of the mud and the piers will settle, crack, collapse. Peter's solution is radical. Build islands first, then build piers on the islands. Wooden coffer dams, double-walled oval structures made from timber piles driven into the riverbed, packed with clay to seal against water, pumped dry to create temporary dry zones where stone foundations can be laid. 19 coffer dams. 19 artificial islands arranged in a line across the Thames. Once the piers are built inside them, the cofferdams remain permanently, becoming starlings, stone-encased wooden structures that protect the piers from current and ice. It's a technique used occasionally in Europe, but never at this scale, never in a tidal river this violent, never with stakes this high. The king approves funding. Taxes are levied, bridge tolls collected at existing crossings, fees on wool exports, donations from guilds and wealthy merchants who understand that a stone bridge will transform London's economy. The money flows slowly, but it flows. Peter begins organising materials. Kentish ragstone quarried south of London, transported by barge. Timber from forests in Kent and Surrey. Lime for mortar. Iron for tools. By late 1176, the first survey crews arrive at the Thames. They drive marker posts into the mud, stretch ropes to mark where the 19 piers will stand. Fishermen watch from boats. Merchants gather on the wharfs. Children point at the posts and ask questions their parents can't answer. Can a stone bridge really span the Thames? Can 19 piers hold against tides that move like living force? Can wood and stone cooperate long enough to create something permanent? Peter de Colechurch stands on the northern bank, looking at marker posts barely visible above the water, and begins answering those questions with timber, stone, and faith that engineering can defeat a river. The work begins. The survey posts are in place. The crossing is marked. 19 points across the Thames where stone piers will rise, if the river allows it. But the Thames has no intention of cooperating. Twice daily the tide surges in from the North Sea, raising water levels 4.5 meters, reversing the current, turning calm flow into turbulent force. Then the tide retreats, draining the river, exposing mud banks. leaving construction crews a narrow window of time before the cycle repeats. To build foundations in this chaos, Peter de Colechurch must first create stillness. He must carve dry zones from the river itself, protected spaces where stone can be laid while water rages around them. He must build islands that don't exist. The cofferdams begin. The first cofferdam is built near the southern bank where the river is shallowest and the current weakest. It's a test, a prototype. If this one fails, the entire bridge project ends before truly beginning. The design is deceptively simple. 2 concentric ovals of wooden piles driven into the riverbed, separated by 2 meters of space that will be packed with clay to create a watertight seal. The interior oval encloses an area roughly 8 meters long and 6 meters wide. Enough space for a foundation pier plus room for workers to maneuver. Crews arrive at low tide when the mud is exposed and the water has retreated downstream. They carry oak piles, tree trunks stripped of branches sharpened to points, each one 5 meters long and thick as a man's thigh. Heavy, awkward, difficult to position in slippery mud. The pile driving begins with hammers and rhythm. 4 men lift a wooden pile vertically, holding it steady while a 5th man climbs a wooden platform and swings a massive mallet, a hammer weighing 20 kilograms, requiring both hands and full body weight to control. The mallet strikes the pile's top. The pile sinks a few centimeters into mud. Another strike, another few centimeters. The rhythm becomes steady. Lift, position, strike, check, vertical alignment, strike again. One pile takes 30 minutes to drive to adequate depth, 3 meters into the mud, reaching firmer material below, and the cofferdam requires 60 piles for the outer oval, 40 for the inner. 100 piles total, 50 hours of hammering, and that's just the first cofferdam. 18 more wait. The tide controls everything. Workers have perhaps 6 hours during low tide to drive piles before water returns. When the Thames rises, work stops. Crews retreat to shore, watching their progress disappear under brown water, hoping the piles they drove remain upright, haven't shifted, haven't been undermined by currents swirling around their bases. Days blend into tidal cycles. Work, retreat, wait, return, work again. Once the piles are driven, the clay packing begins. Workers shovel thick Thames clay, dug from the riverbanks, carried in baskets, dumped into the 2-meter gap between inner and outer pile walls. The clay is tamped down with wooden poles, compressed until it forms a dense, sticky barrier. When water infiltrates from below, the clay swells slightly, sealing tighter. It's not perfect. Seepage continues, but it reduces water infiltration enough that the next phase becomes possible, pumping the interior dry. Inside the inner oval, water still pools waist-deep. Tidal flow seeps through gaps in the clay seal, through spaces between piles, through the mud itself. The water must be removed and kept out long enough for foundation work to proceed. Hand-powered pumps, wooden mechanisms with leather valves and iron handles, are lowered into the cofferdam. Teams of 4 men work the pumps in shifts, lifting water from the interior and dumping it outside. It's exhausting, repetitive, seemingly futile. Pump for an hour and the water level drops a hand's width. Stop pumping and it rises again within minutes. The crews learn to work in rotations, one team pumping while another rests, trading places every hour, maintaining constant effort because the moment pumping stops, the river reclaims the space. The first cofferdam takes 3 months to complete and dry. 3 months for one island. Peter de Colechurch watches this progress with growing concern. 19 cofferdams at 3 months each means 57 months. Nearly 5 years, just to create the workspace for building piers. The timeline is unsustainable. Funding will run out. Workers will leave for other projects. The bridge will die in planning. He makes adjustments. Multiple cofferdams will be built simultaneously. Crews are divided, some working near the southern bank, others starting at the northern side. Teams eventually meeting in the centre, where the river is deepest and the current strongest. It's more expensive, requires more supervisors, increases risk of accidents, but it's necessary. By late 1177, 5 cofferdams are under construction at once. The Thames fights back with weather. Winter storms drive rain horizontally, flood the river, tear at wooden piles that aren't yet secured by stone. Spring brings ice, not thick enough to walk on, but dense enough to batter the cofferdams, to splinter exposed timber, to crush piles that haven't been reinforced. Summer heat dries the clay packing, causes it to crack, allows water to seep through gaps that weren't there before. Workers drown. It's inevitable. A man loses footing on slippery mud during low tide, slides into a channel where current still flows, gets swept downstream before anyone can reach him. Another is struck by a pile that shifts during hammering, crushed between timber and riverbed. Bodies are pulled from the Thames and buried in Suffolk churchyards. Families are compensated from bridge funds. Work continues. How do you build on water that refuses to stay still? How do you seal against a river that finds every weakness, every gap, every moment of inattention? How do you convince men to work in a place where one mistake means drowning in cold brown water that tastes of mud and salt? By 1180, 14 cofferdams stand in the Thames, wooden ovals rising above high tide, their interiors pumped dry, their walls holding back the river through nothing but clay and constant effort. From the banks they resemble a line of strange islands, too regular to be natural, too crude to be beautiful. But they're functional, they're dry, and inside them, foundation piers can finally begin rising from the mud. The cofferdams near the centre, where the river runs deepest, prove most difficult. Water pressure increases with depth. Seepage becomes torrents. Pumping crews work day and night in shifts, fighting exhaustion and cold water that numbs hands within minutes. Some of these central cofferdams require double clay walls, extra piles, reinforced bracing. They take 5 months each instead of 3, but one by one they're completed. 19 wooden islands standing in the Thames, 19 protected zones where stone can be laid without being washed away, 19 beginnings. Peter de Colchurch walks across the construction site during low tide, stepping from riverbank to the nearest cofferdam, then carefully making his way from island to island, checking each structure's integrity. The cofferdams will remain permanently. They'll be encased in stone later, becoming starlings that protect the piers. But for now, they're just wood and clay and human stubbornness, holding back a river that wants everything returned to water and mud. The islands are ready. The foundations can begin. And the real test, whether stone can root itself in the Thames, is about to start. The cofferdams stand like wooden fortresses scattered across the Thames, 19 islands pumped dry, holding back the river through clay seals and constant human effort. But they're empty inside. Just mud and space, waiting for the stone that will transform them from temporary structures into permanent foundations. Now comes the part that determines whether the bridge lives or dies. Stone piers must rise from the riverbed, anchored deep enough that tides can't shift them, tall enough to lift the bridge above high water, strong enough to support 19 arches and everything that will cross them for centuries. The foundation work begins, and immediately the Thames reveals how little it respects human ambition. Inside the first cofferdam, workers stand ankle-deep in mud that the pumps couldn't remove. Thames mud, thick, grey-brown, clinging to boots and tools like wet clay mixed with silt and centuries of river debris. Beneath it lies the material they need, compacted gravel or bedrock, something solid enough to build on. But reaching it means excavating by hand, in a space barely 6 meters wide, while pumps run constantly to keep water from rising above ankle level. The excavation begins with shovels and baskets. Workers dig, scooping mud into woven willow baskets that are hauled up and dumped outside the cofferdam. Progress is measured in hand widths per hour. 1 meter down, the mud becomes denser, heavier, harder to lift. 2 meters down, gravel appears, small stones mixed with packed sand. A worker kneels, tests it with a wooden probe, presses his weight against it. The gravel holds. It's not bedrock, but it's firm enough. Peter de Colechurch inspects the excavation floor personally. He walks the perimeter, probing with an iron rod, checking for soft spots that might indicate voids or channels where water flows beneath. Finding none, he approves the depth. Foundation stones can be laid. The first stones arrive by barge during low tide, Kentish ragstone blocks, each weighing between 50 and 100 kilograms, rough cut in quarries south of London. Workers lower them into the cofferdam using rope slings, guiding them down carefully to avoid cracking against the wooden walls. Laying foundation stones underwater, or nearly underwater, is more art than science. The excavated floor is never completely dry. Groundwater seeps up through the gravel. The pumps keep it from flooding, but they can't eliminate moisture entirely. So the first course of stones is laid directly onto damp gravel, positioned carefully, tested for level using wooden straight edges and plumb bobs. Each stone must sit flat. If one rocks or tilts, it's repositioned until stable. Mortar doesn't work underwater. Lime mortar requires air to cure. It hardens through a chemical reaction with carbon dioxide. Submerged mortar stays wet, stays weak, washes away. So the lowest foundation courses are laid dry, stone on stone, relying on weight and friction to hold position. Only after the foundation rises above the water table can mortar be introduced. The foundation grows slowly. 1 course per day during the first weeks, 10 to 12 stones covering the cofferdam's interior floor. Workers kneel in cold water, positioning stones by hand, checking alignment, making adjustments. Their hands go numb. Clothing stays wet for weeks. The damp cold settles into bones and doesn't leave. At 1 meter above the excavation floor, the foundation rises above persistent seepage. Mortar can finally be used. The mortar is mixed on shore, burnt lime powder, sand, water, stirred until it reaches the consistency of thick porridge. Workers carry it to the cofferdam in wooden buckets, spreading it between stone courses with trowels. The mortar fills gaps, bonds stones together, begins transforming individual blocks into monolithic mass. But mortar curing requires time, days for each course to harden adequately before weight is added above, and time is rationed by the tides. During low tide, work proceeds normally. During high tide, water rises around the cofferdams, seeps through the clay seals, threatens to flood the interior despite the pumps working continuously. Twice daily, work pauses while crews reinforce pumps, check clay seals, bail water faster than it infiltrates. Twice daily, they gamble that the cofferdams will hold until the tide retreats. Winter brings ice, and ice brings catastrophe to cofferdam 7. It's January 1183. The Thames partially freezes during a cold snap. Not solid ice, but thick plates that drift downstream with the current, heavy enough to impact the wooden piles with sledgehammer force. Cofferdam 7, positioned in the river's centre channel where current runs strongest, takes repeated hits. A pile cracks, the outer wall shifts, clay packing loosens, water pours through the breach. Workers inside scramble as water rises to their knees, their waists, their chests. Pumps are overwhelmed. The foundation stones, 3 courses laid, partially mortared, disappear under brown water. The crew evacuates, climbing out as the cofferdam floods completely. Peter de Colchurch watches from a barge, helpless. Months of work erased in minutes. The cofferdam isn't destroyed, the piles still stand, but the interior is compromised. Repairs will take weeks. The foundation will need to be inspected, possibly rebuilt from the excavation floor upward. How do you build on ground that shifts beneath you? How do you trust wood and clay to hold back a river that finds every weakness and exploits it without mercy? How do you convince workers to return to a place where their labour can be erased overnight by forces they can't control? The repairs take 6 weeks. Additional piles are driven around Cofferdam 7's perimeter. The clay seal is rebuilt thicker. A second interior wall is added for redundancy. When work resumes, the foundation is re-excavated, removing mud that seeped in during the flood, and the stones are relayed from the bottom. By 1185, 9 foundation piers are complete, rising from riverbed to 3 meters above high tide level. These piers are massive, 6 meters wide at the base, tapering slightly as they rise, built with cores of rubble and mortar faced with cut stone. The upstream face of each pier is pointed, a wedge shape designed to split the current, deflecting water around the pier rather than allowing it to press full force against a flat surface. The pointed shape is critical. Current flowing directly against a flat pier creates turbulence, scouring the riverbed around the foundation, undermining stability. A pointed shape smooths the flow, reduces turbulence, protects the foundation from erosion. It's a lesson learned from older bridges, from Roman aqueduct designs, from generations of trial and failure. 3 piers near the northern bank incorporate additional reinforcement. Elm wood piles driven through the gravel layer into deeper clay below. Elm, when kept continuously wet, becomes nearly indestructible. Romans used it for underwater foundations centuries earlier. Medieval builders rediscovered the technique through necessity. The elm piles act as deep anchors, preventing settlement even if the gravel layer compresses over time. The remaining 10 piers progress through 1186 and into 1187. Some go quickly. The southern piers where the river is shallowest, where bedrock lies just 2 meters down. Others struggle. The central piers where water is deepest, where current is strongest, where every day of work costs twice the effort. Workers develop routines born of repetition. Morning arrives with a low tide. Crews descend into cofferdams, inspect overnight progress, resume laying stones. Tide rises. Work pauses for pumping and maintenance. Tide falls. Work resumes. Day after day, month after month, stone rising from mud 1 course at a time. By 1192, all 19 foundation piers stand complete, 19 stone pillars rising from the Thames, each one rooted in gravel and clay, each one pointing upstream like a blade cutting water. From the banks they resemble a stone forest growing from the river, unnatural, geometric, strangely beautiful in their uniformity. Peter de Colchurch stands on the northern bank, looking at what 16 years of labour has created. The piers aren't the bridge, they're just the beginning, but they're proof that stone can defeat water, that foundations can hold in a river that drowns everything temporary. The skeleton is ready. Now the arches must connect them. 19 stone piers stand in the Thames like sentinels guarding against the current. They've survived ice, floods, storms, and 16 years of construction. But standing alone, they're just pillars, isolated, disconnected, useless for crossing. The bridge needs arches, stone curves spanning the gaps between piers, carrying weight through geometry rather than brute strength, transforming vertical pillars into horizontal passage, and arches, despite appearing simple, are perhaps the most unforgiving structures in medieval engineering. Build them incorrectly, and they collapse spectacularly. Build them right, and they stand for centuries. Peter de Colechurch has 19 gaps to span, 19 chances to succeed or fail. The arch construction begins. The gap between the first and second piers measures 7 metres. Not the widest span, that will come later in the central arches, but wide enough to present real challenges. 7 metres of empty air that must be filled with stone shaped into a curve, each stone pressing against its neighbours, the entire assembly holding itself up through compression once complete. But until complete, the arch is unstable, vulnerable, requiring support. That support comes from wooden centering, a temporary framework that holds the arch stones in position until the final keystone locks everything together. The centering is built in sections on shore, then transported by barge and assembled between the piers. It's constructed from oak and elm beams, strong woods that won't compress significantly under load. The framework forms a perfect semicircular curve matching the intended arch shape. Its surface is smoothed and sometimes covered with planks to create a continuous platform where stones will rest during construction. Lifting the centering into position requires coordination during low tide when the water between piers is lowest. Workers guide the framework into place, bracing it against both piers, adjusting height until the curve sits precisely where the finished arch will be. Wooden wedges driven beneath the centering allow fine height adjustments, critical because if the centering is even slightly off level, the arch will be misaligned. Once the centering is secure, stone cutting begins. Each arch requires voussoir stones, wedge-shaped blocks that fit together like pieces of a puzzle. The wedge angle must be precise, too steep and gaps appear between stones, too shallow and stones don't seat properly. Masons work on shore with wooden templates, cutting stones to match the arch's curve, numbering each piece so assembly order is clear. The first stone, the springer, is set on the pier's top surface at the point where the arch begins its curve. This stone is larger than the others, serving as anchor and transition between vertical pier and curved arch. Mortar is spread on the pier top. The springer is positioned, checked for alignment with plumb lines and straight edges, tapped into place with wooden mallets. The springer on the opposite pier is set simultaneously, creating 2 starting points for the arch. From here, the arch will grow from both sides toward the centre, where the keystone will eventually complete it. The second voussoir stone is set on top of the springer, its wedge shape causing it to lean inward slightly, beginning the arch's curve. Mortar fills the joint between stones, not thick mortar, but a thin layer that fills gaps without creating soft spots. The stone rests primarily on the centering framework below, which supports its weight until the arch is complete. Stone by stone, course by course, the arch grows from both piers inward. Workers stand on scaffolding built around the centering, positioning stones, spreading mortar, checking alignment constantly. Each stone must seat firmly against its neighbours, Each joint must be tight. Small errors compound. A gap of 1 centimetre at the springer becomes a gap of 10 centimetres by the time you reach the arch's midpoint. The work is slow, 2 to 3 stones per day during good weather. Stones are heavy, 50 to 80 kilograms each, requiring 2 workers to lift and position. And positioning happens meters above the river, on scaffolding that sways slightly in wind, with the Thames flowing beneath through gaps between piers. At the arch's quarter point, the curve becomes more pronounced. The stones lean inward at steeper angles, pressing more forcefully against the centering. The framework groans under the weight, not failing, but audibly protesting the load. Workers pause occasionally to inspect the centering, checking for cracks or compression, tightening wedges that have loosened. Halfway up the arch, the stones are nearly vertical, the point of maximum curve. Here, each stone relies entirely on the centering for support. Without it, the stones would fall inward. The geometry hasn't begun working yet. The arch is still just a pile of wedge-shaped rocks held up by wood. 3/4 complete. The stones begin angling back toward vertical as the curve descends toward the opposite pier. The gap at the arch's crown, the highest point, narrows to less than a metre. 1 more stone will fit there, the keystone. But before the keystone can be placed, a problem emerges in the 5th arch. Workers notice that the centering has shifted slightly, barely, visible just a few centimetres, but enough to misalign the stone courses approaching from opposite piers. The 2 halves of the arch don't meet at the same height. One side is 3 centimetres higher than the other. The cause? A wedge beneath the centering has compressed under load, settling unevenly. It's a small failure, but it threatens the entire arch. If the keystone is forced into a misaligned gap, stress will concentrate at the joint, creating a weak point that could crack under load. Peter de Colechurch makes the decision: dismantle the upper courses, re-level the centering, rebuild. It costs 2 weeks. Workers grumble. Hours of labour erased, stones lowered back to barges, mortar chipped away. But Peter is unwavering. An arch must be perfect or it's nothing. How do you build a curve that supports itself when every stone wants to fall until the last stone is placed? How do you trust that geometry will hold thousands of tons when intuition says stone should only stack vertically? How do you balance 19 arches so precisely that the bridge doesn't twist or settle unevenly under its own weight? The keystone placement becomes ceremonial. For each completed arch, workers gather to watch the final stone set. The keystone is larger than the voussoir, deliberately oversized, carved with the date or a mason's mark. It's lowered into the gap at the arch's crown, tapped gently with mallets until it seats firmly, locking the voussoir stones on both sides into compression. And then comes the test, removing the centering. Wedges beneath the framework are loosened gradually, lowering the centering a few centimetres at a time. The archstones settle, pressing against each other, beginning to carry their own weight. Workers watch for cracks, listen for grinding sounds that would indicate shifting. The centering drops further. The arch holds. Finally, the centering is removed completely, lowered to a barge and transported to the next gap. The arch stands alone, stone pressing against stone in pure compression, holding itself up through shape and physics. The first arch is complete by 1194. The second and third follow within months. The fourth takes longer. It's the widest span, 10.5 metres, requiring a taller centering and more voussoir stones. The curve is shallower, the stress is different, the margin for error smaller. By 1198, 14 arches are complete. 5 remain, including the drawbridge arch near the northern bank, a special design that will incorporate a lifting mechanism allowing tall-masted ships to pass through. The drawbridge arch uses a segmented design. The centre section can be raised using chains and counterweights, creating a gap large enough for ship masts. When lowered, it completes the arch normally. The mechanism is complex: wooden gears, iron chains, a counterweight chamber built into the pier below. It takes a year to construct and test. By 1200, all 19 arches are complete. The bridge has a skeleton and a spine, piers and arches creating a continuous stone pathway across the Thames. From the banks, the structure finally looks like a bridge rather than a construction site, but it's still not crossable. The arches create the framework, but people can't walk on curves. A level roadway must be built on top, connecting the arches, smoothing the irregularities, creating the surface that will carry London's traffic for the next 6 centuries. The roadway construction begins. 19 arches curve across the Thames, each one a triumph of geometry and stone. But arches aren't flat. They rise and fall, creating a wavy surface, peaks at each arch's crown, valleys where arches meet the piers. You can't drive a cart across curves. You can't walk comfortably on undulating stone. The bridge needs a roadway, a level surface spanning 280 metres from Southwark to the city, smooth enough for horses, wide enough for carts passing in opposite directions, durable enough to survive centuries of traffic and weather. 24 years into construction, the bridge finally becomes crossable. The roadway begins with fill. Between the arches, in the valleys where stone curves down toward the piers, workers dump rubble, broken stone from the quarries, fragments left over from cutting voussoir blocks, chunks of limestone too irregular for structural use. This rubble fills the low points, raising the surface toward level. But rubble alone creates an unstable surface. It shifts under weight, settles unevenly, allows water to pool in voids between stones. So the rubble is compacted. Workers use wooden rams, heavy stone blocks, and their own weight to compress the material, forcing stones to wedge together tightly. On top of the compacted rubble, a layer of mortar and smaller stones is spread, a bedding layer that fills remaining gaps and creates a relatively smooth surface. This layer is 2 hand-width thick, mixed wet, spread with wooden floats, left to cure for days before additional weight is added. The roadway width is fixed at 8 metres, wide enough for 2 carts to pass carefully, narrow enough that the bridge doesn't require excessive material or weight. This width is measured from the outer edges of the parapets that will be built later, so the actual paved surface is closer to 7 metres. Across the mortar bedding, paving stones are laid. These aren't rough blocks, they're dress stones, limestone slabs cut to uniform thickness, roughly square with relatively flat-top surfaces. Each stone is 1 hand thick, sized so that 2 workers can lift and position it. The stones are laid in a running bond pattern, joints offset like brickwork, preventing long, continuous lines of weakness that would crack under traffic. The paving starts at the southern end at Southwark and works northward toward the city. Masons work in teams of 3, 1 positions stones, 1 spreads mortar joints, 1 checks level with straight edges and water-filled troughs. The roadway must be level side to side, but it slopes very slightly from centre to edges, just enough that rainwater runs off rather than pooling. This slope is subtle, perhaps 2 centimetres of drop from centreline to edge. Barely noticeable when walking, but critical for drainage. Medieval engineers understand that standing water destroys stone. It seeps into joints, freezes in winter, expands, cracks the pavement apart. The roadway must shed water immediately. At the piers, the points where arches meet, the roadway rises slightly. Each pier top sits higher than the arch crowns, creating gentle humps across the bridge's length. Workers add extra fill at these points, building up the surface gradually so the slope isn't too steep. Even so, the finished roadway undulates slightly, rising and falling every 15 meters or so as it crosses each pier. Carts will feel this. Horses will adjust their gait. But it's unavoidable. The alternative would be cutting down the pier tops, which would weaken the entire structure. Drainage channels are carved along both edges of the roadway. These are shallow grooves, 10 centimeters wide, 5 centimeters deep, cut into the paving stones near the parapets. Rainwater flowing off the roadway's central slope collects in these channels and runs toward openings where it drains through the bridge deck, falling into the Thames below. Without these channels, water would pool against the parapets, seep into the roadway structure, eventually undermine the paving. The drainage openings, scuppers, are positioned every 20 meters. Their simple holes cut through the roadway fill, lined with stone to prevent erosion, angled slightly outward so water flows freely into the river. During heavy rain, dozens of waterfalls pour from the bridge's sides, visible from boats passing underneath. Parapets are built last. Low walls running along both edges of the roadway, providing safety barriers and defining the bridge's visual profile. The parapets are stone, courses of limestone blocks mortared together, rising 1 meter above the roadway surface. Not tall enough to prevent a determined person from climbing over, but adequate to stop a stumbling pedestrian or a nervous horse from going over the edge. The parapet tops are capped with flat stones, slightly overhanging, shedding rainwater outward away from the roadway. At regular intervals, the parapets incorporate recesses, small alcoves where pedestrians can step aside when carts pass. The roadway is narrow. When two carts meet, someone on foot needs refuge. These recesses are built directly above the piers, where the bridge structure is strongest and can support the additional masonry. The roadway work progresses steadily through 1203 and into 1204. Unlike the dramatic arch construction, this phase is methodical, repetitive, almost mundane, but it's essential. Without a roadway, the bridge is just sculpture. By mid-1204, the paving is complete from Southwark to the central pier, halfway across. Workers stand at this midpoint looking north toward the city and south toward Southwark. For the first time they can walk on the bridge, feel stone beneath their feet instead of scaffolding or barge decks. The bridge is becoming real. But the roadway surface is just the beginning of what will eventually cover this bridge. Peter de Cole Church has always intended more than a simple crossing. The bridge will support buildings, shops, houses, a chapel. These structures will generate rent, and rent will fund perpetual bridge maintenance. A bridge that pays for itself. Foundation points for future buildings are incorporated into the roadway now while construction is underway. At specific locations chosen for structural strength, above piers or thick arch sections, stone pads are built into the roadway. These pads are thicker, reinforced with extra mortar, designed to bear the weight of timber frame buildings that will eventually rise here. Each pad measures 4 meters by 3 meters, positioned on both sides of the roadway, leaving the central 7 meters clear for traffic. The pads are marked with carved stones indicating their purpose. Future builders will know where to anchor timber posts, where to dig foundations for stone party walls, where weight can be safely concentrated. How do you build a road on a curve? How do you ensure that weight pressing down doesn't cause arches below to shift or crack? How do you create a surface that will survive not just traffic, but the weight of houses, the accumulation of centuries? By 1205, the roadway is complete. 280 metres of paved stone connecting Southwark to the city, sloping gently for drainage, rising and falling over pier tops, solid enough to carry carts, horses, pedestrians, and eventually the buildings that will transform this bridge into a neighbourhood. The first cart crosses in April 1205, a symbolic gesture. A wool merchant volunteers his horse and wagon, loads it with empty barrels to simulate weight, drives slowly from the southern bank to the northern. The bridge holds. The horse's hooves clatter on stone. The cartwheels rumble. Spectators lining both banks cheer. Peter de Colechurch walks the entire length that evening after the crowds disperse. He places his hand on the parapet, feels the stone, cool, solid, permanent. 29 years since construction began. He's an old man now, his hands gnarled, his back bent from decades of overseeing work in all weather. The bridge is nearly finished. The roadway is down. Soon, the buildings will rise. And then, finally, London will have what it's needed for a century. A crossing that won't burn, won't collapse, won't fail. He stands at the bridge's centre looking downriver toward the sea, listening to the Thames rush through the arches below. The current is faster now. The piers and starlings have narrowed the river significantly, concentrating flow. It creates rapids, dangerous passage for boats. Shooting the bridge will become a challenge that claims lives, but the bridge stands, and that's what matters. The roadway is complete. Carts cross daily now, carrying goods between Southwark and the city. Merchants pay tolls. Pedestrians hurry across. The bridge functions as intended, a permanent stone crossing ending London's dependence on ferries. But Peter de Colechurch's vision extends beyond simple passage. The bridge will become more than infrastructure. It will become property. Buildings will rise on its back, shops facing a street suspended above the Thames, houses where families live and work, a community floating on stone arches. It sounds absurd. Building on a bridge creates weight, blocks passage, complicates maintenance. But it also generates revenue. Rent from bridge properties will fund repairs forever, making the structure self-sustaining. And in a city where land is expensive and space is scarce, the bridge offers 280 metres of prime real estate. The construction begins, and the bridge transforms into something unprecedented. The first building rises on the southern end, just past the Southwark Gatehouse. It's a modest structure, 2 stories, timber-framed, built on one of the reinforced stone pads incorporated into the roadway. The ground floor will be a bakery. The upper floor, living quarters for the baker's family. The building measures 4 metres wide and 6 metres deep, positioned on the bridge's eastern edge, leaving the roadway clear for traffic. The construction technique is standard medieval timber framing, vertical posts, horizontal beams, diagonal bracing, all joined with mortise and tenon connections secured by wooden pegs. No nails. Wood fitted to wood, locked together through precise carpentry. But building on a bridge presents unique challenges. The foundation isn't earth, it's stone roadway resting on arches. Digging post holes is impossible. Instead, the timber posts are anchored to the stone pads using iron brackets set in lead. Holes are drilled into the stone. Iron spikes are inserted. Molten lead is poured around the spikes, cooling and hardening to create anchors. The timber posts slot onto these spikes held upright by brackets. The building rises quickly. Timber framing takes weeks, not months. By summer 1205, the bakery is complete. Roof tiles are laid. Windows are shuttered. The baker moves in and opens for business, selling bread to travellers crossing the bridge. The success of the first building triggers demand. Other merchants want bridge properties, prime location, constant foot traffic, visibility from both banks. Peter de Colechurch begins leasing additional building sites, prioritising locations above piers where structural capacity is greatest. Within a year, 12 buildings stand on the bridge, 6 on each side, creating a narrow street between them. The roadway, originally 8 metres wide, is now compressed to less than 4 metres in places. Carts must slow down. Pedestrians press against walls when wagons pass. It's crowded, chaotic, profitable. The buildings aren't uniform. Each tenant constructs to their own needs and budget. A goldsmith builds 3 stories, shop on ground floor, workshop on second floor, family quarters on third. A fishmonger builds 2 stories with a large cellar dug into the bridge deck for cold storage. A cloth merchant builds wide but shallow, maximising street frontage. The technique of jettying begins appearing. Upper floors extending beyond the ground floor, overhanging the roadway or cantilevering over the river. Jettying serves practical purposes. It increases floor space without expanding the ground floor footprint. It protects the ground floor from rain. Upper floors shed water away from timber posts below, and it creates covered walkways along the building fronts, sheltering pedestrians during storms. But jettied buildings on both sides of the bridge narrow the roadway even further. In some sections, the gap between facing buildings shrinks to 3.5 metres, barely enough for a single cart. 2 carts meeting must wait, one backing up until reaching a wider section. Fire becomes an immediate concern. Timber buildings packed tightly, cooking fires in every household, candles and oil lamps for lighting. It's the same hazard that burns through London's neighbourhoods regularly. But on a bridge, fire is more dangerous. There's no spreading to adjacent streets. Buildings can only burn along the bridge's length, and escape routes are limited to 2 directions, north toward the city or south towards Southwark. Peter de Colechurch mandates fire breaks, gaps between buildings where stone party walls prevent flames from jumping. Every 5th or 6th building, a 2-metre gap is left clear, filled with a freestanding stone wall running perpendicular to the roadway. These walls are 3 metres tall, thick enough to withstand heat, designed to compartmentalise fire. The stone party walls also serve structural purposes. They help distribute building weight more evenly across the bridge deck, preventing concentrated loads that could stress individual arches, and they provide lateral bracing. When wind blows along the river, the party walls help stabilise the timber buildings against racking. By 1207, over 40 buildings stand on the bridge. The structure has transformed from a crossing into a street, a narrow, crowded, strange street where pedestrians walk above the Thames, where shop sounds mix with river sounds, where looking down through gaps between buildings reveals water rushing 20 metres below. Some buildings extend over the river itself, cantilevered balconies, overhanging rooms, privies that discharge directly into the Thames. It's efficient waste disposal, and in a city where sanitation is primitive, dumping sewage into a fast-moving tidal river is considered acceptable practice. The buildings rise higher. 3 stories become 4, 4 become 5. A tavern near the centre of the bridge builds 6 stories, each floor smaller than the one below, creating a stepped profile. The 7th story is barely more than an attic, but it has windows overlooking the entire Thames, and the tavern charges premium prices for rooms with that view. Weight accumulates. Thousands of tons of timber, plaster, roof tiles, furniture, people, stored goods, all pressing down on the roadway, on the arches, on the piers. The bridge was designed for traffic, not for supporting a neighbourhood. But the piers hold. The arches don't crack. The stone distributes the weight, and the structure adapts. How do you live on a bridge? How do you raise children, run businesses, sleep at night while feeling the bridge sway slightly when heavily loaded carts pass? How do you trust that stone and timber will hold you above water that wants everything back? The bridge residents develop their own culture. They're neither Southwark nor city. They're bridge people. They have their own aldermen, their own rules, their own taxes. The bridge becomes a legal entity, a jurisdiction unto itself, governed by the Bridge House Estates Trust that manages rents and maintenance. Windows face the roadway. Shops need visibility. But windows also face outward over the river, providing ventilation, light, and views that no landlocked building can offer. Residents watch ships pass below. They see the sun rise over the city and sunset over Southwark. They live suspended between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. By 1209, the bridge is barely recognisable as infrastructure. It looks like a street that happens to cross water. Buildings crowd both sides, their jettied upper floors nearly touching overhead in places, blocking sky, creating a tunnel-like passage through the centre. Shop signs hang above doorways, painted symbols for the illiterate, a boot for the cobbler, shears for the tailor, a fish for the fishmonger. The noise is constant. Cartwheels rumble on stone, horses neigh, merchants shout prices, hammers ring from workshops, children run between buildings, and underneath it all the Thames rushes through 19 arches, creating a sound like distant thunder that never stops. Peter de Colechurch walks the bridge one evening in late 1209, months before his death. He's created something unprecedented, not just a crossing, but a city on water, a neighbourhood suspended on arches, a place where engineering and commerce and daily life have merged into something no one planned but everyone accepts. The buildings will stand for centuries. Some will burn and be rebuilt. Some will collapse into the river during storms, but new buildings will replace them. The bridge will never be empty again. It's become too valuable, too useful, too embedded in London's fabric to ever return to simple stone and roadway. The bridge is alive, and it will stay that way for 600 years. The bridge is crowded now. Buildings rising on both sides, shops doing brisk business, families living in timber-framed houses suspended above the Thames. But two structures remain unbuilt. Two elements that will transform the bridge from commercial street into something more significant. A chapel and water wheels. The chapel will sanctify the bridge, make it holy ground, provide a place where travellers can pray before crossing. The water wheels will make the bridge useful beyond passage, pumping fresh water from the Thames to the city's fountains and cisterns, solving London's chronic water shortage. Both structures require engineering as ambitious as the bridge itself, and both will define the bridge's identity for centuries. The construction begins. The chapel site is unusual. It's built on the bridge, but not on the roadway. Peter de Colechurch chose a central pier, the 10th pier from the southern end, as the foundation. This pier is larger than the others, 8 metres wide instead of 6, built with extra reinforcement specifically to support a chapel above. The pier's top surface, normally level with the roadway, extends upward an additional 3 metres, creating a platform. On this platform the chapel will rise. The dedication is already decided. St. Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury, murdered in 1170 by knights loyal to King Henry VI. Becket was martyred, canonised, became a saint whose cult spread rapidly through England. A chapel dedicated to him will attract pilgrims, generate donations, sanctify the bridge with his protection. The chapel's foundation is laid in 1207. Stone blocks mortared directly onto the pier's extended platform. The foundation is 2 metres thick, sufficient to support walls, a vaulted ceiling and a roof. The chapel will be small, 10 metres long, 6 metres wide, but it will be stone, permanent, highly visible from both banks and from boats passing underneath. The walls rise in courses, each stone carefully positioned. The chapel has 2 levels, a lower crypt built into the pier itself, accessed by a stairway descending from the roadway, and an upper chapel at roadway level with windows facing east and west. The crypt is dark, cool, intended for burials. Peter de Colechurch has already requested to be buried here when he dies. It's fitting. The bridge master interred in the bridge he spent his life building, his bones resting on a pier in the middle of the Thames, surrounded by the current he fought for decades. The upper chapel features lancet windows, tall, narrow openings with pointed arches, fitted with iron grills but no glass initially. Glass is expensive. The chapel receives it later, donated by merchants whose businesses thrive because the bridge exists. The windows let in light, allow views of the river, make the interior feel less enclosed. This ceiling is stone vaulted, a simple ribbed vault, similar in principle to the arch construction, but on a smaller scale. Stone ribs span, from wall to wall, supporting infill sections. The vault creates a curved ceiling that strengthens the structure and provides acoustic qualities appropriate for worship. Voices carry, prayers echo softly, the space feels larger than its dimensions. Above the vault, a small bell tower rises, just tall enough to hold a single bell, whose sound will ring out across the Thames, calling prayers, marking hours, warning of fires or emergencies. The bell tower is visible for kilometres, a landmark helping travellers orient themselves. The chapel is completed in 1209, just months before Peter de Colechurch dies. He attends the dedication ceremony, a mass celebrated by the Bishop of London, attended by merchants, nobles, workers who built the bridge. Candles flicker, incense smoke rises. The bishop blesses the structure, declaring it holy ground. Peter kneels in the chapel, hands folded, and thanks God that he lived long enough to see this finished. While the chapel rises on its central pier, another project begins under the northern arches, the water wheels. London has always struggled with water supply. The Thames is tidal, brackish near the city, undrinkable without treatment. Springs and wells exist, but they can't supply 100,000 people. Water must be carried in buckets, purchased from vendors, rationed. It's a daily burden, especially for residents on higher ground who must haul water uphill. The bridge offers a solution. Water wheels powered by the current rushing through the arches. The current is fierce now. The piers and starlings have narrowed the river from 280 metres to roughly 60 metres of open flow. Water accelerates through these gaps, creating rapids with enough force to turn wheels, and turning wheels can pump water upward through pipes to the city. The first water wheel is installed under the northern arches in 1208. It's massive, 6 metres in diameter, built from oak and elm, fitted with paddles that catch the current. The wheel is mounted on an iron axle anchored to the bridge pier and the adjacent Starling, positioned so the Thames current strikes the paddles at optimal angle. When the tide ebbs, when water flows downstream toward the sea, the wheel turns one direction. When the tide floods, when water reverses and flows upstream, the wheel turns the opposite direction. The wheel turns continuously, 12 hours in each direction daily, driven by tidal forces that never rest. The wheel's axle connects to a gear system, wooden cogs and iron pins transferring rotational motion to a vertical shaft that extends upward through the bridge deck. At the top of this shaft, pumping mechanisms are installed, wooden pistons inside iron cylinders, rising and falling as the shaft rotates, drawing water upward through elm pipes. The pipes run along the bridge roadway, then connect to a distribution system in the city, lead pipes carrying water to public fountains, cisterns in wealthy households, markets where water is sold by the bucket. The system delivers thousands of gallons daily, easing London's water crisis significantly. How do you capture a river's strength and make it serve human needs? How do you build machinery that functions underwater, in salt and silt, exposed to ice and debris, yet continues working for decades? How do you turn tidal chaos into reliable power? The water wheel mechanisms require constant maintenance. Paddles break when debris strikes them. Gears wear down, teeth strip, axles bend. A dedicated crew of millwrights works full-time maintaining the wheels, replacing parts, clearing blockages. It's expensive, but the revenue from selling water covers costs and generates profit. Additional water wheels are installed over the following years. By 1215, 4 wheels operate under the northern arches, pump and water continuously. The sound becomes part of the bridge's identity. Wooden paddles slapping water, gears grinding, pumps clanking rhythmically. Residents living above the wheels complain about noise, but they also benefit from easy water access. The wheels also grind grain. Some are adapted with millstones, processing wheat and barley into flour. Boats deliver grain sacks to the bridge, where they're lifted by pulley to the mill mechanisms. The flour is sold in bridge shops, creating another revenue stream for the bridge house estates. The chapel and water wheels transform the bridge's purpose. It's no longer just a crossing or a commercial street. It's a place of worship, a utility provider, a mill complex. The bridge has become infrastructure in the fullest sense, serving multiple civic functions simultaneously, integrated into London's daily life in ways that make it indispensable. Peter de Colechurch dies in 1205, before the chapel is fully complete but after seeing its walls rise. He's buried in the crypt as planned, his tomb marked with a simple inscription, Peter, builder of the bridge. His bones rest in the pier, surrounded by stone he supervised, held up by foundations he designed, washed by tides he fought for 30 years. The bridge he built will stand for 6 centuries. The chapel will serve pilgrims until the Reformation. The water wheels will pump water until the 1800s, when steam engines replace them. But in 1209, all of this is just beginning. The bridge is complete in structure, but still evolving in purpose. It will continue changing, adapting, serving London in ways Peter never imagined. The stone chapel stands, the wheels turn, and the bridge lives. The bridge is nearly complete. Buildings stand on its back. The chapel rises from a central pier. Water wheels turn under the northern arches. The roadway connects Southwark to the city across 280 metres of stone and timber. But a bridge this valuable needs protection. It's a strategic asset. Control the bridge, control London's southern approaches. It's an economic asset. Tolls generate revenue. Properties generate rent. And it's a symbolic asset. the greatest engineering achievement England has produced in centuries, so the bridge needs defences, stone gatehouses at both ends, towers with gates that can be closed, mechanisms that transform the crossing from open passage to fortified barrier within minutes. The final construction phase begins. The bridge becomes a fortress. The southern gatehouse is built first, at the Southwark end where the bridge meets land. The location is strategic. Southwark is outside the city's jurisdiction, historically lawless, populated by taverns, brothels, theatres, and elements that London's authorities view with suspicion. The gatehouse will control who enters the bridge from the south, allowing guards to inspect carts, collect tolls, turn away undesirables. The gatehouse is stone, 3 stories tall, built directly onto the bridge's first pier and the adjacent roadway. The ground floor is a passageway, an arched tunnel 10 metres long, just wide enough for a single cart, with murder holes in the ceiling where defenders can drop stones or pour boiling liquid on attackers trapped below. Inside the passageway, 2 gates provide layered defence. The outer gate is oak, thick planks bound with iron straps, hung on massive iron hinges anchored into the stone walls. It opens outward, swinging away from the bridge, requiring attackers to pull it toward themselves while exposed to projectiles from above. The gate is reinforced with iron studs, nail heads covering the wood surface, making it difficult to chop through with axes. Behind the outer gate, a portcullis descends from a slot in the ceiling. The portcullis is iron, vertical bars spaced close enough that a person can't squeeze through, sharpened at the bottom to points that will impale anyone caught beneath when it drops. The portcullis is raised and lowered by chains wound around a windlass on the second floor, operated by 2 guards turning a crank. The second floor houses the guardroom, quarters for 6 soldiers who maintain constant watch, sleeping in shifts, ready to close the gates if threat approaches. The room has arrow-slit windows facing south, providing views of the approach road while protecting archers from return fire. The third floor is the roof platform, crenellated battlements where defenders can stand protected behind stone merlons, shooting arrows or throwing projectiles at attackers below. The platform also holds the windlass mechanism for the portcullis, accessible through a trapdoor from the guardroom below. The gatehouse is completed in 1209, immediately staffed with guards paid from bridge revenues. Tolls are collected here. Merchants pay based on cargo type and quantity. Pedestrians pay a halfpenny. Livestock pay per head. The tolls fund ongoing bridge maintenance, pay guards' salaries, support the bridge house estates. The northern gatehouse, at the city end, is built simultaneously but with different design. This gatehouse is taller, 4 stories instead of 3 because it serves additional purposes beyond defence. The city's authorities want administrative space, a customs office, storage for toll records. The structure incorporates all of this while maintaining defensive capabilities. The passageway design matches the southern gate, narrow tunnel, murder holes, double gates with portcullis. But the upper floors are more elaborate. The second floor is the customs office where clerks record tolls, track bridge revenues, manage property leases. The third floor houses additional guards and a small armoury, racks of spears, bundles of arrows, spare portcullis chains. The fourth floor is a watchtower with views across the Thames in both directions, allowing guards to spot approaching ships, monitor river traffic, signal warnings to the city if threat appears. Between the 2 gatehouses, the bridge can be sealed completely. Close both gates, lower both portcullises, and the bridge becomes impassable. a stone barrier cutting London off from its southern territories but also protecting the city from invasion. The gates are tested regularly. Guards practice closing them quickly, simulating emergency scenarios. The goal is full closure in under 2 minutes, time enough to respond to approaching trouble, but fast enough that attackers can't rush the gates while they're being secured. The drawbridge mechanism, incorporated into the 9th arch from the northern end, provides an additional defensive feature. This arch was built with a segmented design. The centre section can be raised using chains and counterweights, creating a gap 12 metres wide. When raised, the drawbridge prevents ships with tall masts from passing upstream toward the city's wharfs. When lowered, it completes the roadway normally, allowing carts and pedestrians to cross. The drawbridge is raised at night, standard procedure, preventing unauthorized river traffic after dark. During times of tension or threat, it stays raised continuously, forcing all river traffic to stop at the bridge and submit to inspection. The mechanism is complex. 2 heavy chains attached to the drawbridge section, running over pulleys mounted on the pier tops, descending to a counterweight chamber built into the pier below the waterline. The counterweights are stone blocks totaling 3 tons, heavy enough that when released they drop and pull the drawbridge section upward. Raising the bridge requires winding the chains back onto a windlass, lowering the counterweights back to their starting position, work requiring 6 men and 20 minutes of cranking. The drawbridge is tested weekly, ensuring the mechanism functions smoothly, chains aren't corroded, pulleys aren't jammed. Failure would be catastrophic. Either the bridge remains permanently open, losing its defensive value, or permanently closed, blocking ship traffic and strangling the city's trade. The final defensive element is added almost as an afterthought, but it becomes the bridge's most notorious feature, the display spikes. On the southern gatehouse roof, above the crenellations, iron spikes are mounted on wooden poles. The spikes are 2 meters tall, positioned prominently so they're visible from both approaches. Their purpose is simple and brutal, displaying the severed heads of executed traitors. How do you make a bridge defensible when it's also a public thoroughfare? How do you balance commerce with security, allowing thousands to cross daily while maintaining ability to seal the crossing within minutes? How do you warn potential enemies that London's power extends beyond its walls? The heads begin appearing in 1210. The first belongs to a rebel knight executed for treason. His head is dipped in tar to slow decay, mounted on a spike, displayed for weeks until birds and weather reduce it to skull. More heads follow over the centuries. By the 1300s, a dozen heads decorate the southern gatehouse constantly, replaced as old ones fall apart and new traitors are executed. It's grotesque. It's effective. The message is clear. London has power. London has justice. And disloyalty ends here. Peter de Colechurch doesn't live to see the gatehouses fully complete. He dies in 1205, 4 years before the final stonework is finished. But his design included them from the beginning. He understood that a bridge this valuable couldn't remain undefended. That structure alone wasn't enough. Power required teeth. By 1209, 33 years after construction began, Old London Bridge is complete. 19 stone arches spanning the Thames, 2 fortified gatehouses, a stone chapel on a central pier, 4 water wheels pumping water to the city, 200 buildings housing shops, homes, workshops, a drawbridge that can seal the river, and above the southern gate, iron spikes waiting for traitors' heads. The bridge Peter envisioned in 1176, a permanent stone crossing, has become something far more complex. It's a street, a fortress, a chapel, a utility, a neighbourhood, a symbol, its infrastructure and community and defence and commerce all compressed onto 280 metres of stone suspended above the Thames. The bridge opens officially with ceremony, nobles, clergy, merchants crossing together, tolls waved for the day, celebrations lasting from dawn to dusk. But the real celebration is quieter. The first cart that crosses without paying a ferry, the first family that moves into a bridge house, the first time a Londoner draws water from a fountain fed by the bridge wheels. Old London Bridge stands, and it will stand for 600 years, outlasting dynasties, surviving fires and storms and sieges, adapting to centuries of change while remaining fundamentally what Peter de Colechurch built, stone-rooted in the Thames, holding London together. Evening settles over the Thames and the bridge grows quiet. The last carts have crossed. Merchants close their shops, pulling shutters across windows, securing doors with iron bolts. Families gather in upper rooms, children settling into beds, parents tending cooking fires, the sounds of daily life compressed into timber frames suspended above the river. Candles flicker in windows. Smoke rises from chimneys, drifting across the water toward both banks. The gatehouse guards change shifts. 6 men descend stone stairs, replaced by 6 others who will watch through the night. The portcullis remains raised. No threat tonight, just the usual flow of late travellers hurrying to reach home before full darkness. Torches are lit along the bridge, casting orange light across the roadway, creating pools of illumination separated by shadow. Below, the Thames flows through 19 arches. The current is swift here, compressed by the piers and starlings into channels barely 3 metres wide. Water rushes, tumbles, create standing waves and eddies that make passage dangerous even for experienced boatmen. The sound is constant, a low roar that never stops, that bridge residents hear so continuously they no longer consciously notice it, the way people living near the sea stop hearing waves. The water wheels turn in darkness, 4 massive wheels under the northern arches, their paddles slapping water rhythmically, gears grinding as they transfer power to pumps that lift Thames water upward through elm pipes toward the city. The wheels don't rest. Tide changes direction twice daily, reversing the current, reversing the wheel's rotation, but the pumping continues regardless. Water flows upward, fills cisterns, supplies fountains, serves thousands who never see the bridge mechanisms that make it possible. Stand on the bridge at night, at the midpoint where the chapel rises from its stone pier. Place your hand on the chapel wall, cool stone, solid, permanent. Listen. The river below, the wheels turning, wind moving through the narrow passage between buildings. Somewhere, a dog barking, a baby crying, the ordinary sounds of life happening in an extraordinary place. The bridge is 33 years old tonight, counting from when the first cofferdam was driven into the riverbed in 1126. An entire generation of Londoners has grown up during its construction. Children born the year work began are now adults with families of their own, many of whom live on the bridge itself, in houses built on the structure they watched rise stone by stone through their childhoods. Peter de Colechurch is buried 4 years now, his bones resting in the chapel crypt, surrounded by the Thames he fought for 3 decades. He never saw the final gatehouse completed, never saw all 200 buildings standing, never collected rent from all the properties, but he saw enough, saw the arches complete, saw the roadway paved, saw the first carts cross, saw the chapel walls rise. He died knowing the bridge would stand, and it does stand, through storms that would have shattered wooden bridges, through tides that would have undermined weaker foundations, through the weight of buildings, the traffic of thousands, the constant pressure of a city using it as essential infrastructure. The stone endures because it was built to endure. Foundation piers rooted in gravel 7 meters below the riverbed. Arches shaped to distribute weight through compression. Mortar mixed properly, cured slowly, bonded to stone through chemistry older than human understanding of chemistry. Wood and iron and lead and clay and limestone working together, each material doing what it does best, the whole becoming stronger than any part. But the bridge endures for another reason. It's useful. Rents from bridge properties fund constant maintenance. Revenue from tolls pays for repairs. The water wheels generate income. The chapel receives donations. The bridge pays for itself, creating financial incentive to keep it standing that's as strong as the stone itself. This is Peter's genius, not just building a structure, but building a system. The bridge isn't a monument requiring royal funding to maintain. It's self-sustaining, economically viable, embedded so deeply into London's commerce and infrastructure that abandoning it becomes unthinkable. 600 years from now, long after the last person who remembers its construction has died, the bridge will still stand. It will survive the medieval period, the Renaissance, the English Civil War. It will see London grow from 100,000 people to over 1 million. It will witness the Great Fire of 1666, which will destroy much of the city but leave the bridge intact because its stone doesn't burn. But eventually it will come down, not through collapse or disaster, but through obsolescence. By the 1820s, the bridge will be too narrow for modern traffic, too medieval for an industrial city, too old and crowded and strange. A new bridge will be built beside it, wider, flatter, more practical. And in 1831, Old London Bridge will be demolished, its stones sold, its buildings torn down, its foundations removed from the Thames after standing for 655 years. But tonight, in 1209, all of that is unimaginable future. Tonight the bridge is new. The mortar is still curing in some joints. The timber in the newest building still smells of fresh cut oak. The water wheels are so new they haven't yet worn grooves in their axles. Everything is beginning. A man walks the bridge length. A merchant returning late from Suffolk to his home in the city. His footsteps echo on stone. He passes darkened shops, lit windows, the chapel with its single candle burning inside. He nods to the northern gatehouse guards, passes through the tunnel, emerges onto city streets. Behind him, the bridge settles into night. Stone cools, wood creaks, the river flows, the wheels turn, and somewhere in the darkness the bridge breathes. Not literally, but almost. The way all structures breathe when they're lived in, used, needed. The way a house feels different when occupied versus empty. The bridge is inhabited now, and it will remain. Inhabited for centuries, never empty, never silent, never just stone. Sleep comes to the bridge the way it comes to a city, not all at once, but in waves. Windows go dark one by one. Voices fade. Footsteps stop, until finally only the guards remain awake, and the water wheels turning, and the Thames flowing underneath. Patient and persistent, the force that the bridge was built to defeat, but also the force that makes the bridge necessary. Old London Bridge stands in darkness, stone and water in eternal negotiation, human ambition holding its ground against the river's patience, and it will hold for 600 years. Sleep now, in the shadow of what medieval hands built when they refused to accept that a river couldn't be crossed permanently. Sleep listening to water rushing through stone arches, to wheels turning in darkness, to the quiet proof that engineering can outlast the engineers who create it. The bridge stands, the river flows, and between them London sleeps, secure, connected, whole,